Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to give folks a minute to connect to the audio. And we want to invite you, as you're coming in, to let us know in the chat where you're coming from. And you can tell us where you are now or where home is for you. If you know, please feel free to share what native land you're on, and we'll share a link in the chat that allows you to look that up. So for example, I'm in the Bronx right now, which is Lenape land. Okay, it looks like folks are connected. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Poor Bronte, this is like the presenter's worst nightmare, was just logging on to check everything with us, and her Wi-Fi and her whole house went out. So she had to run to a neighbor's house. So I want to invite everyone to start off by just joining us in taking maybe one deep breath to let go of whatever else has happened today, and enter this space thoughtfully and as peacefully as we can. For some reason, Zoom just asked me if I started speaking a different language. Okay, so tonight is really a special event for us. To start off, I'm Amy Starczewski. I direct the Oral History Master of Arts program here at Columbia. And one of the great pleasures and honors of that role is that I usually get to curate this public programming series. This year, the whole theme of the series came from the winners of our Brodsky Prize. And the Jeffrey H. Brodsky Oral History Award is given to one or sometimes more students annually whose thesis makes an important contribution to knowledge and most exemplifies the rigor, the creativity, and the ethical integrity that we teach our students. Unfortunately, I'm sad to share that in July 2023, Jeff Brodsky passed away at age 49 after battling Parkinson's disease for the past decade. And so as we've been going through this series and encountering the work that he and his family allowed us to honor this year, we've been reflecting on his many important and enduring contributions to Columbia and beyond. So when I'm done with the introduction, I'll drop a link in the chat if you want to read a little more about Jeff and his work. So Bronte Gosper's thesis, which we'll experience tonight, was awarded the Maine 2023 Jeff Brodsky Prize for an outstanding thesis. And I won't do a long introduction because I want to get right into her work. But I'll just say, we often talk in these events and in thinking about what oral history is and what it can be, that oral history has this really special layered temporality, right? That it's a conversation about the past happening in the present and oriented towards the future. And that's a very linear way of thinking about time that actually is very limiting in a lot of ways. So one of the reasons we were so excited about and excited to share Bronte's work is that she really proposes an Indigenous approach to nonlinear time and narrative in oral history, both in the way that she's doing her fieldwork, grounded in place, grounded in community, and in the way that she's curating the stories that she's recorded. So Bronte Gosper is a proud Wiradjuri woman who is passionate about telling diverse Indigenous stories in a variety of mediums, including film, theater, and photography. She's a recent alum of the Oral History MA program here at Columbia. And I think, as you'll all see, her work serves as a really powerful reminder that Indigenous stories are dynamic, evolving, and integral to our understanding, not only of indigeneity, but of our collective human experience. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bronte, who's going to talk with us a bit, share some clips from the film that's really at the heart of her thesis. We'll probably do that for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But as you're listening, please feel free to drop comments, questions, anything in the chat. It's nice and there to have sort of a space for side discussion, and I'll be chiming in there and helping to bring those questions into the Q&A section. So thank you so much, Bronte, for joining us. Thank you all for coming, and I'll pass it over.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you all for being here. Yiradu marang manigalang, Yuwendu Bronte, Warajiri Yino Waludi. My name is Bronte Gosper. I'm a Wiradjuri woman from a town called Orange in the southeast of Australia. I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge that I currently am on the island of Mannahatta and on land that is Lenape-Hoking, homeland of the Lenape, who were violently displaced as a result of European settler colonialism over the course of 400 years. I'd like to pay my respect to the Lenape peoples, the Lenape elders and their ancestors past, present and future, and invite everybody wherever you are to feel the weight of the place that you're in, and the owners of the place you're in. I'd also like to just pay my respect to Indigenous people across the nation and across the world, including my own people, the Wiradjuri people, and hope that in our unity as Indigenous peoples, we can continue to connect with each other and with other communities across land masses. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you all about my experience of recording a few Indigenous oral histories in Australia, and I'm going to be outlining my thesis, which was called Collapsing Time, Indigenous Storytellers and the EVERYWHEN. This is a docu-series in part, and also an exploration of what Indigenous temporality looks like. I'm going to be kind of focusing on the first episode or installment of this series that I made as part of my thesis, which focuses on Bardi woman Rahana Angus, who is from a place called Ardialoon, which is 200 kilometers north of Broome, if any Australians are here, which is in a state called Western Australia, which is in the west of Australia, shockingly. And yeah, me and Rahana are good friends, as well as her being my narrator for this oral history project. And we kind of journeyed her life and her home over 4 days back in 2022. So that's when I refer to Rahana Angus, that's who that is. So I'm gonna share my screen, as everyone likes to say in Zoom calls. How do I do that? Yes. Okay. Let me just. Okay. Right. Okay. So, this thesis kind of became what it was really from looking at time as a force in its own right. So as much as control of land and possession of land is one of the strongest forces of colonization, control and possession of time, I think, is often underlooked, is that a word? Often overlooked in how we think about colonization and the forces that really kind of trap us in a settler mindset. And so when I first started this project, it was about recording activist stories. And what I've got on the screen here is some commonly used protest slogans in Australia. And you'll notice that a lot of them emphasize time or mention time or temporality. Still here suggests temporality and a place, still happening or existing before now and continuing into the present. Always was, always will be. A statement about the past and the future and the present. Sovereignty, not just of a place, but of time. And then just below that, I have a quote from Rahana, where she says, I still practice my law and culture. I still live off the sea. I know where I belong. So I'm just trying to draw attention, I suppose, to how time and how conversations about time and temporality are really embedded in protests against colonization, and statements about what it is to be Indigenous have a lot to do with time and temporality. So this story is kind of a part of many stories in a web of Indigenous stories around the world. And really important to me when I was making this thesis was recording these stories for the narrators' children and the narrators' families, so that it can be passed along for future generations. And my responsibility as a Wiradjuri woman and community member, which is really inspired by this Wiradjuri concept of Yinjamara, which is all about respect and awareness to what's happening now and what has happened before. At least that's how I kind of interpret it. And yeah, so it's a cultural purpose really inspired this thesis a lot, and cultural knowledge was shared with me that I'm very grateful to have been trusted with. So yeah, this is just a glossary of some words that are used a lot in Indigenous communities and I may use throughout this presentation. Mob, which is people will ask each other in Australia, who's your mob, which means like, where's your country, which people are you from, how do you identify yourself within your community. White fella is typically a white Australian, but it also can apply to any non-Indigenous Australian. It used to at least apply historically to just mean someone that's come to the land. Black fella, black with a K without a C, is how Indigenous Australians often refer to themselves. Country with a capitalized C is your land, a place imbued with law, a place of story. And Balanda just means long ago in Wiradjuri, which is my people's language. And story means the dreaming, in a sense, which I will come to explain later. So yeah, a lot of, when I started out my research, and I mean throughout my life, I've just kind of had this fixation on how Indigenous testimonies have been used in Australia and abroad, and how they're often co-opted by the state to tell a certain story about itself. Aboriginal voices are often called upon at times of great national need, in transitional periods, or where the nation has to prove its character on the world stage. In early decades of colonization in Australia, Indigenous testimony was actually not accepted in courts, and Indigenous witnesses were held in chains with the accused. It was really only in the face of a lot of pressure from evangelical leaders in Britain and reports of the colony's inhumanity reaching foreign shores that the Australian government decided to kind of loosely bring in Aboriginal evidence in a series of acts that really held no weight, but seemed to respond to this international pressure to look as if Australia was not this horrible place that kept its witnesses in chains, and to sort of say, oh, well, we're letting people speak. But really, it didn't really, societally, first of all, people didn't really trust what Aboriginal people were saying, and the acts didn't really hold much weight in the courtroom. There was some statements from a 1920s inquiry about the Forest River Massacre, which was a really big massacre, where there's, like, you can see that the prosecutor was saying, like, you can't really believe what a native says, and you can get a native to say anything. And a lot of those kind of statements are really rife throughout any court testimonies from that period. And then so, you know, that kind of continued throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s in various ways. Of course, there were moments when Indigenous testimony was listened to more for whatever reason, but it's kind of the overall mood of what was happening to Indigenous testimony. So voices were never really heard wholly or completely. And in the 90s, there was an inquiry called the National Inquiry into the Separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children from Their Families that resulted in the Bringing Them Home report, which you can see on the left of the screen there. And this sort of seemed like an opportunity for Indigenous testimony to be heard on a national scale. And there had been decades-long calls for this inquiry to happen, pushed by really strong Indigenous activists across the country and across the world. But it kind of, again, only really happened after Australia faced significant international pressure, as a lot of other countries were starting to do truth and reconciliation commissions. And the parameters of this report were really strict, and it had a touted vision before it even began to bring this chapter to a close, to bring this shameful chapter of Australian history to an end, and to close the chapter and to firmly locate Indigenous suffering in an imagined past. And survivors of the stolen generation, which include my grandmother, my great aunt, many of my friends' families as well, really almost every Aboriginal person I know has been affected by the stolen generation. And the survivors received no monetary compensation. So in a sense, Aboriginal voices were kind of heard by the settler population to not to kind of rupture or reveal, but to put an end and put the issue to bed. And the then Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, as they were called at the time, stated that, quote, "What we must recognize is that a lot of people have benefited by that policy of removal, and in regards to compensation, money might compound the problem. From my own experience as a medical practitioner, a great deal of benefit will occur just purely out of the process of people being able to go before that inquiry and talk about what has occurred to them." And then when the full report was released, a lot of right-wing politicians used it as an opportunity to air out their critiques of the mythology of colonization and question the legitimacy of oral history as a way of ascertaining anything true or anything factual, which is a very common debate around oral history, as I'm sure you all know. So this kind of revealed a really important point for me, which is that for settler colonial nations, redressing the ill treatment of Indigenous people via monetary compensation, as opposed to symbolic performances of lending an ear, would deeply threaten the legitimacy of the settler state and would threaten the continuation of the settler state. Challenged by legitimate Indigenous claims to sovereignty, symbolized in giving monetary compensation, the colonial future would be destabilized. So in this way, hearing testimony kind of becomes weaponized as a way to locate Indigenous sovereignty or ownership of land in the past and ensure colonial stability in the future. So Elizabeth Strakosch and Elisa Macoun wrote about this a lot and said that colonial sovereignty makes a fundamental claim to own the future because its jurisdiction cannot be divided. So it refuses the possibility of sharing that future in an ongoing way. Colonial sovereignty is a performance claiming to be an essence, unlike Indigenous sovereignty, which is the resilient existent. The unrecognized investment in colonial defined futures suffuses the settler approach to policy, academic work, and progressive allyship. So in that sense, the settler future is taken to be the most urgent political consideration and somehow inevitable for closing other futures. This shaped our orientation to the now. And they also point out that the inevitability of that future legitimizes intensive and violent work in the present, creating a falsified innocence of the settler state through which we can confront the political demands, can avoid confronting the political demands Indigenous sovereignty makes on us in that moment, and justify a settler future, a future in which settlers ultimately belong. this is kind of really most strongly shown in this entire voice to parliament debate, which I'm sure the Australians in the audience and probably other people are aware. An actual enshrined voice, an actual legalized way of hearing Indigenous voices was shut down and voted against. And I wrote this thesis before that the voice to parliament process was underway, but there was a lot of campaigning at the time. And, you know, for many, many years, Indigenous people had been talking about a voice to parliament, which means that there would be an advisory body of Indigenous people who would be consulted on issues that pass through parliament, on issues that pertain to Indigenous people that pass through parliament. So it's a pretty loose claim and small request, but nonetheless. And this is kind of a statement again that shows this temporality, how temporality plays a part in this. It's a really non-committal, bureaucratic statement, which the opposition government made at the time about the voice, which was that the party continues to aim to work in a bipartisan way to support constitutional recognition. And this is kind of what you see a lot of the statements around things that would really benefit Indigenous people. It's often this like, well, in the future, perhaps we would aim to maybe do that. I mean, if that was ever, you know, and I think that's kind of normalized a lot. And the control of the future is implied in all of these statements, a settler control of the future. So because of this treatment of Indigenous voices and how time is weaponized when it comes to Indigenous voices, I wanted to kind of find a way to put Indigenous voices in a place that was free, or at least less impacted by this control of the future and control of the past from a settler perspective. Even, I mean, at a personal person-to-person level, I think there was a discussion that I had with a lot of Indigenous academics and oral historians at the conference in LA, the Oral History Association, big conference in LA in 2022, where people talked about even Indigenous voices in like a conversational level seem to face a lot of misappropriation and romanticizing. And people want to hear Indigenous testimonies if they fit into a certain story. And when Indigenous people spoke, it seemed as if we did not speak to be heard, but to be part of a performance of symbolic listening that served more so to confirm the morally upright character of the listener, rather than to really hear what was being said. So I discussed this with my narrators a lot, and, you know, these kind of the ever nodding head of I don't know, the listener, the settler listener. And we kind of figured out, or tried to figure out ways to address this. I found that non-Indigenous audiences who heard about my thesis, or not heard, who I told about my thesis, were kind of more interested in these like activist stories, the implication that I was doing something of use within existing settler colonial structures and recording these painful stories. And it made me kind of wonder why an Indigenous story is more relevant when it's a story of suffering. And it kind of emphasized to me these roles that Indigenous people play in the grand, you know, world of listening, and where Indigenous voices can be heard and where they can't be heard. And it's these conditions of settler colonialism kind of ensure that these expectations of Indigenous stories of suffering keep reproducing themselves again and again. So that's what we were trying to escape. And one of my narrators, who's a Wiradjuri man, Shane Runciman, and I talked a lot about how to leave settlers out of the story entirely and how to avoid that. And that kind of ended up not really being possible. And the most resonant answer that I got to that question was from Rahana Angus, who is the woman who you will see in these clips that I'll show you guys shortly. And she said, just let the tide take it. And at first I was like, okay, she's just saying something dramatic, because, you know, she's an actress. She's a wonderful person. She like loves to say these like really like dramatic statements. I was like, this is great. Like, but then I kind of thought about it, and the tides are a really important feature of Bardi life, and they're holders of Bardi temporality. So I kind of started thinking about how I could kind of give in to a tide and what that meant in terms of time. And when I began to make this documentary and film my narrators' stories, I realized that the temporality that they were skewing, I don't know how to say that word, was kind of not linear at all. It was really circular, and yeah, there was no like clear start or finish to these stories. And I think that had really powerful discursive implications. So I kind of accidentally came to focus on time and how it came out in all my narrator stories. So this is where the EVERYWHEN kind of comes in, and where Indigenous conceptions of temporality start to be really important. So I just have a few quotes here. In contrast to Western historical narratives, which often move along progress-oriented journeys towards modernity, Indigenous ways of understanding time eschew the flatness and linearity of timelines. And another, to talk about time, you have to talk about the spiritual, and you have to talk about country. Buru is place and time. Indigenous Australians, despite differences across mobs, nations, and clans, all have some iteration of the dreaming, which is a really difficult term to define, and people have totally different definitions of it everywhere across the country. But I quite like this definition of it, which says manifestations of ancestral beings as the physical landscape and as the society, as the social and ecological order that the ancestors created, and as animals, plants, or natural features such as wind and fire. Importantly, the dreaming is not conceived as being located in an historical past, but as an eternal process which involves the maintenance of these life forces. So even, yeah, within the concept of the dreaming, how time is viewed is really important. And I think often non-Indigenous academics present dreaming as this thing of like the stories of the past. But importantly, I think it should be interpreted more as an ongoing story that needs to be told about the present and the future and the past. So I kind of tried to elucidate Indigenous temporality for myself, and these ideas that the eternal is always present and the ancient past that lives in the present determines everything that there is. And Dr. Lilla Watson, who's a Gungalo and Birragubba woman, articulated this really well. And she said, we see our future stretching out as far in front of us as it does behind us. And I think often the settler imaginary kind of tries to represent Indigenous people as either outside of time, timeless, or behind time. The quote below Dr. Lilla Watson's is from a 1960s missionary publication. Well, it's from someone who was writing about the 1960s missionary publication. And they kind of implied that history itself was a Christian concept. Only cultures that had received the Bible could wake from their dreaming, conceive of time as linear progress, and participate in history. So yeah, the implication that the Indigenous people or other groups of people across the world are behind time and need to be brought into modernity really resound even now in Australian political debates about Aboriginal people. So I kind of, noted a lot of compelling themes in both of my narrators' attempts to break through colonial systems. But I think, this is why I kind of took this focus on temporality. Past and future were never more or less important. Old and young, like, people did not definitively exist in hierarchies of above and below. A lot of my conversation with Rahana, it was me, Rahana, and her nieces and nephews and her aunts and uncles, and there was no kind of implied hierarchy of who could speak when, and Rahana frequently referred to that phenomenon, that was really important to having discussions. So I wanted to give space to this in my thesis and kind of present this layered now. And this is where story comes in. When Indigenous people talk about story, it's kind of a more layered concept, I suppose, than just the word story. And Rahana kind of emphasized this in these two quotes, where she said, our ecosystems are changing, global warming is starting to affect our communities, our waters are starting to rise, there's a lot of changes. But all in all, what's changed was we don't have our old people left to tell us those stories. Stories have to be passed on. And she said, our story, that's what we value the most. It's very important in our communities, in our culture. And in historical scholarship, story was kind of dismissed as legend or myth. But the word actually denotes Indigenous modes of history telling or historical practice, particularly our oral traditions associated with landscapes of significance. The word story is preferred to history because it has no need to be written down, and because it is not history in the sense of being located wholly in the past. It is part of something larger, continuous, and ongoing. Story can be about any and every time. It persists in and outside of time, with time itself refusing to be pinned down. So yeah, often Western historical ideas around the importance of keeping stories alive range from sentimentality to avoidance of historical revisionism and a range of other things. But for Indigenous people and for Bardi people, the pressure of colonialism and the impending destruction on communities like Rahana's, which is surrounded by the sea and will probably soon be underwater. Climate change adds a layer to why story is so important, and it's essential for survival. Story, by observing time in a non-hierarchical fashion without sacrificing the present for an imagined future, is a reaffirmation of the now. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about what some other scholars have said about this, which is Mark Rifkin wrote this book called Beyond Settler Time, and it's a really great book. Everyone should read it. But he talked a lot about how employing notions of temporal multiplicity opens the potential for conceptualizing native continuity and change in ways that do not take non-native frames of reference as the self-evident basis for approaching Indigenous forms of persistence, adaptation, and innovation. And he kind of, this idea is also, you see it in Michelle Caswell's work, which is about refusing white time. So yeah, a lot of people have talked about this. And there's also a lot of musicologists who've noticed this kind of temporality. And a Noongar musician, Clint Bracknell, spent a lot of time studying the songs of the Noongar people. And he noticed that there's a word for long ago that translated to in the cold time of long ago, which was likely a reference to the Ice Age. So the deep time of Indigenous storytelling is really important for documenting these kind of historical events. But yeah, dreaming, importantly, was not really conceived as being located in a historical past, but as this eternal process which keeps going and keeps informing the now. And there was a colonial observer, like a settler, who was living in the Walpurgis community in Central Australia, and he couldn't tell whether the Indigenous people were talking about were living or belonged to ancient times or were merely imaginary. And you see this in the song system as well, that the song system adapts and changes and finds new contexts for meaning making. So this idea that the past and its relation to the present is constantly changing kind of really resists this idea that Indigenous people have these old ideas about the world that are really irrelevant and just random songs that don't make any sense. It's actually really not only recounting the past, but continually putting it in opposition to and in relation to the present. Sorry, my computer's not working. Yeah, so this is sorry. So yeah, this woman, Sarah Yu, recorded an oral history of Kimberley elders. And she noted these two quotes were really important, which is, "We respect the time. Bulgari Gata, the dreaming made this for us, and we carry the law for Bulgari Gata. People must stay with the time, stay with the law of the country." And one of her narrators said, "People must stay with the time, stay with the law of the country. It is ongoing and never stops. People are always talking about country and therefore always talking history." So you can kind of see, yeah, that this is a unique temporality that's tied in with the land and tied in with story and doesn't just exist as delineated past, present, and future, but rather as a collapsed temporality. So when Rahana, I kind of tried to mirror this in my documentary, when Rahana is talking in the beginning, we kind of stay within the car, the space of the car, and we kind of somewhat linearly discuss Rahana's past, her triumphs and sufferings. But once we step onto country in Adialun, that shifts. And I tried to structure the documentary in a way that when the viewer steps out of the car at Adialun, they're no longer bound by linear structure. It's unclear when we return to Broome, at what points of the journey we are in which place. It's unclear how we end up with Rahana's son, Buddha. But the viewer has no choice but to observe and to pay attention to time and to Buddha's wishes, which are to listen. From the beginning, what was meaningful to Rahana was not her work. I often would try and ask questions about her work as an activist and her work as a community leader, of which she's done so much. But she really wanted to tell me about her family. And from the beginning, we talked so much about fishing and collecting oysters, and doing those activities with her family. And the storying that we did with the fish and the oysters is sort of dictated the narrative structure. So I oriented the time world of my documentary around fish and fishing. Our orienting points are fish on the fire, songs, and story. So I just wanted to show a little example of this, or just kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to show a clip from the documentary. I'm just going to mute myself, I think. Yes. Can you guys hear me? Great.
Yeah, we hear you.
Sorry. So the clip is about 10 minutes, but it just should give you an idea of that non-linear structure.
Where did you go, Regan? Can you go ask some sister one?
I'm telling you, I'm eating your fish.
No. You're not a fish. Okay, ready?
Can we switch
Okay.
the bottle?
Yeah, can you switch it off now then? No, this boy is still eating it first. Okay, when his kids stop eating, okay? He brought me up to where I am today. I'm trying to sing it for him. Under a shady tree, I see him lay. My Nyami was always there with my Mimi. Oh, I wish I could see him once again. We would sit around the campfire. He would tell us stories to say. Oh, I wish I could see him once again. Oh, my Nyami was a dream-time hero. He was a hunter, a legend, and a spiritual man. Oh, my Nyami would make us laugh with the things he used to say.
We've had that with our parents, you know. They've had that sense where they've always had us around. They could never sit without us because they needed us there. So they would have us and they would include us in their conversation. And, you know, if one mother was talking to us, you'd see the uncles and all, they'll all have the same subject that we're all talking about. It is the same, like we're just inheriting what we've been taught, you know, to have this circle of family.
Okay, just need to get a shot. Oh yeah, that's a good shot. Go closer.
You got a good shot of that guy.
Yep, now I gotta get a shot of you.
Come on.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Paul. All right, bye-bye. Thank you, bye. Sing it for bye. Huh? Sing it for bye. Sing it from. Bye. That's my son now. Come here. How are you, my son?
Good.
Okay. Well, we're gonna try and go through, but I'm frightened that Abai might lift us here. Abai. Out, Abai.
Go to the back.
Right?
Go to the back. Go this way.
Abai. Out.
And come this way.
Okay, we'll just have to close the door on him and see if he'll go. Abai, out. Look at that. Need to run.
Watch out. Walk around.
Look there, you see how he's doing his foot?
Let him move.
He'll lift you, Letty. Up. Okay, come on.
Group.
Garam yaim khatni. How will it?
chocolate chairs in the back. Bring the car up. If you're gonna wait here, you're gonna jump out and take films of them.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, being out, living in a small community, so they're not frightened of anything. So, because Josh is my sister, the oldest son, and she's got 2 boys, and they're really good boys. They love the sea, they love hunting. So they're not scared of the sea. But as you know, what the water's got in there, so we got terrifying things like crocodiles and sharks. There's luring octopus. They got jellyfish. All of this stuff can be killers. In the sea. They have to navigate their way using the stars. Because like I always say, Aboriginal people are the best navigators. Especially more from the island, who had to navigate on canoes from where the whirlpool is. We're talking about currents that run in every direction. So we've got them coming from Sunday Island, and they have to go to the next island without motor. So they have to try and get to that island, to this island, without ending up in the whirlpool. So they have to find out the best tides using the moon and the stars to go night hunting, or even daytime as well. So they have to know the tides. They have to know what time to go out, what the tides are doing, by using the moon, the stars, and the sun.
Young Maya Amba, which is the young men, they becoming the bosses for our law and culture. So they're the ones who carry on the culture and keep it alive for us. Our language and culture is very important in our community.
Hey, we like live here. We got Bronte over here. We've got Amy, Montana, and Josh. We're going here to the island. Just a minute. I'll show you. Yes, we're on the boat. But yes, Jaime's here, my son. He's come with us. Hopefully we get heaps of oysters.
Really high rocks up here, so we can slow down, make sure that the rocks doesn't hit the motor. But like I said, this chap over here is the chap, and he knows exactly where he's going, and he's going to keep us safe.
Okay, do you know where the other there?
So Delaray, you're going to love this kind of stuff. You got to come here. You're in the partner, and Charlie can come out. With us. So you can say hello. There's a lot of people watching. You can say hello to everybody. Yes. Okay. So, yep. No worries. So, anyways, I got a duty right now, so I have to get the anchor, guys. So, Bronte
This
might be
guy's
able to
name. Put Jerry right here, and then wait for a fish. Okay.
Josh is just gonna jump over and go diving. He's got a speed gun. See that? Yep, here he goes.
Look, I've known Jerry for 4 years. Okay.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, can you just hold that up, son? Yeah. There he is. There he is. See? These guys aren't afraid of the ocean. They come from this country.
Yeah, I'm afraid of Broom Ocean. You can't see the bottom. Like
Well,
seriously.
you back home now.
Back home.
Yep. That's right. It's good to be back home.
Oh yeah, and also he's my other friend.
Oh, look at that. Look at that, you guys.
You know how
Big
long?
one already. Look at that. Big.
You know how long?
What
it took?
one?
3 minutes.
Woo-hoo!
3 minutes.
See that? Look, didn't even take him a minute. He's a man of the sea. Look at that.
Oh, actually, no, wait. What?
Okay, and here he goes again.
34 seconds.
Oh, wow. See that, Della?
Yep. Trying to get my hand in. Turn right around.
You can go for right open the
Infrared.
red dot.
Can you see anything outside? You know those ghost shows on TLC? Yeah, they use this. And when they, I saw this one terrifying one. It's called Mountain Monsters. And I've seen a monster. Like, it was so huge. It was as tall as a tree. Wait. I'm just gonna zoom in a boat. This is how you zoom in ghost shows. Where's this button? This button right here. Oh, the tide is up.
My boys aren't afraid of nothing, so they will get turtle in the middle of the ocean, dive in, get their turtle, and jump back on the boat again. They've learned that fear, you have to have no fear when you're going out hunting. What you have to think about when you do go out hunting is providing for your family and going home to your family. Yes.
There's more to be scared of and room for them.
So yeah, that's around the midpoint of the first episode. And I think it kind of encapsulates just the way that the story kind of was just carried by fishing and searching for oysters and spending time with Rohana's family. And that emphasis on the tides, and you can hear when Hamey, Rohana's son, is filming with the camera in the back of the car, he's kind of like telling funny stories and entertaining everyone, but the second we get close to the ocean, he says the tide is up, and he's like just a young boy, and that's so important to him. And it's so important to their culture. So another thing that when I was filming with my other narrator, Shane, who's the Wiradjuri man that I mentioned briefly before, we were driving by a house on Wiradjuri land that formerly belonged to an Aboriginal slave owner. And he told me this story that had been told to him by a woman who was the daughter of the slave owner, about a slave auction on the property. And Shane started talking about the animals and the plants located on the property, and the biological memory of animals and plants of traumatic pasts. And oh, I realized I'm not sharing my slides anymore. Let me do that again. Sorry. I don't know what that music is. Okay. So can everyone see my slides?
Yes, I see them not in full presenting mode, but it's fine.
Okay.
There you go. Oh.
Let me. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so and then Shane said to me,
is it okay for you to read quotes rather
yeah,
than
I can just read.
Yeah,
it's totally fine. Yeah, so Shane said, since colonization, right, that's a blip on the map, that length of time. But the spirits of the animals still haven't lost the language. They're still here. Language is from the land. The animals still know that. the animals still know their language of what's happened. And that language hasn't been lost. It's there, you know, it's just there. It's ready to be reborn. You've just got to listen to it. And I found it really similar to Ngarigu scholar who expressed a really similar notion. And she said, this elder, she always told my daughter, when you get off the lift at the top near the eagle's nest, you've got to go and speak to this group of rocks. She had never said anything like that until quite recently to my daughter, but she was adamant about this. The crow, that is, the people whose country was up at the top of the mountain, has disappeared today. But there are crows everywhere, and they talk to you all the time. And these quotes also reminded me of another quote that I have here from Bowen Dick Professor Irene Watson. And she said, our natural world is still singing, even though the greater part of humanity has disconnected itself from song. And I think being with Rahana and Shane and filming these journeys and being on country the entire time and being around various animals that have been there for thousands and thousands of years. The question of what songs were being sung and what stories were being told by the animals kind of kept coming into my mind. And I think, sorry, my laptop is being really weird. Yeah, sorry. And it kind of reminded me of the idea that country, which is an idea that implies not just the ground that you're walking on, but the earlier forms and iterations of the ground that you're walking on, the sea and the stars, is a place of time that's deeper than how we often understand it in the settler imaginary. Anne McGrath, a scholar who studies a lot of deep time, described it as a place with agency that transcends the human. And history is embedded within and inscribed on country. So yeah, I think Shane's observations and the observations of other Indigenous scholars and people implies this remembering of history in a different way and in a more embodied way. So that led me to think that these histories should be approached in a different way and in a non-linear way. And it also led me to think about, you know, I guess climate change, global warming, and how we often talk about humanity being in an apocalyptic state. And we blame often the fact that people only seem to be concerned about the now, that they don't have foresight and they're stuck in the present, and this is to blame for inaction on things like climate change and overconsumption. But this process made me sort of think about, is it really true to say that people are concerned about the present and all that the present holds if there's this engagement in hyper-consumerist destruction? And or is it more accurate to say that maybe we're not aware of time at all, and we're almost like tragically unaware of the enfoldedness of time, and this conceptual chopping up of time in which the future, no matter how emphatically it's referred to, remains so distinct ontologically from the present, and that leads us to inaction. So I kind of asked myself the question, what if we kind of became aware of the everywhen, and aware of this enfoldedness of time? So I kind of wanted to take a pause from me just talking, and yeah, embodied in that question as well is, how can we create change in a way that doesn't just reinforce colonial systems, and and I just have some questions for you guys to maybe chime in or think about, which are, how have you felt the everywhen before? Maybe I could put these in the chat. I can do that actually. Can I do? Oh yeah. Okay, I'll just type them in the chat. Yeah, how have you felt the everywhen before? And how did you feel watching that clip? Actually, I wanted to just show you guys one more clip before we did this discussion. Sorry, my slides are out of order. I just wanted to show you guys a clip about that shows a little bit about Rahana's son, Buddha. And he kind of really articulates this idea of Indigenous temporality in a way that's really interesting. And when I was with Rahana's family during the time that I was there, Buddha was actually facing court for the charge of assaulting a police officer, which he pushed a police officer off of him when the police officer was holding him to the ground and breaking his collarbone after he was having a seizure. So he has very frequent seizures, and the police were called to the house by a neighbor when he was having a seizure. And as he pushed the officer off him, he got charged with, or he is facing charges with assaulting a police officer. And Butter and I went to the courthouse together because Rahana was out on country. And we sat in the courthouse for like a really long time and noticed the Aboriginal art that they had hanging on the walls. And on the drive back from the courthouse, he'd been telling me about the judges and the lawyers really only wanting to hear themselves, and that they weren't willing to listen, and that they only wanted to hear him through themselves. And I asked him again about his experience when we got home and was expecting like a similar answer about not being listened to. But he gave me a slightly different one and said they didn't care about time. He said that he wasn't concerned that they didn't care about his time, but that they didn't have respect for time at all. And that kind of reminds me of Sarah Yu's oral histories with the Kimberley elders, where they said that we respect the time. We have to stay with the time, pay attention to time. And Rahana talked a lot about the younger generation's ability to listen to the tides and listen to the time that they were experiencing through the land. So I just wanted to show you guys a clip of Rahana telling Buddha's story and then me speaking to Buddha about his experience. And then we can go into those discussion questions. So let me just...
Bronte, sharing screen, you should see an option for more choices, and you can disable participants' annotation so that
okay,
yeah, we're not interrupted.
That's in, sorry, in share screen.
Yeah,
options?
once you go into share screen, you should see
okay,
it.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Let me just... So yeah, this clip is also about 10 minutes. And it's from where we stopped before. And yeah, Rahana had just been saying that there's a lot more for her boys to be scared of in Broome than there is up at Ardialoon.
and when they walked in, he was really calm. So they're the ones who stirred him up. That bloke just jammed him, like hurting him. So he tried to get his leg up and he kicked that bloke from behind. My son started experiencing seizures at the age of 16, and he was, wasn't doing too good. He didn't recognize he couldn't remember having seizures. We didn't even know what seizures was, So it gradually started to get, like every month he would have a seizure. Every month it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then even the doctors said the same thing. They couldn't prescribe the right medication for him. And it reflected back now on his mental health now. So it's hard to find the right solution, right medication, right healing products for him, But we went cultural ways, try and get him healed. We went the Western ways of trying to get him healed, but yeah, nothing seemed to be working. So we've tried everything. I went through every avenue. It was hard. Police was called to the house.
Yeah.
So they stirred him up, and all of a sudden he was saying, "Just go away, I don't want to talk to you, And all of a sudden there was like, grab him and pinned him to the ground. Before you know it, he was trying to get out of it. Broken collarbone, mental health problem, have seizures. All of a sudden, you look, 2 police officers there, so I started to grab my camera out, I started filming everything. Before I know it, I seen over 20 cops and 7 police cars, or maybe 8 or 9 or 10, because they was all hiding in the dark around my apartment. The whole apartment was packed with police cars and even undercover cops and all. So I started, grabbing my phone and just interviewing them. And I'm saying, what is wrong with you, mobs? So you guys are here, in front of my yard, in my house. You guys here for what reason? For a mental health patient, for someone who has seizures, with someone who has a broken bone, bony a little person like this, and now you're trying to tell me that you guys need reinforcements? What is wrong with you people? So I started calling him all out. I said, so I said to you came in and my son was calm, but you stirred him up, and now he's going to prison. He's going to prison because of you, because you're the one who stirred him. Why did you stir him up for? He was peaceful. He wasn't running amok. He was sitting, and you stirred him up. So it's ridiculous. And so I called them all out. I started saying to them, how powerful the media is. I said, I can really use my power. Just using my Facebook. And I said to them, I sit on the First Nations Media Australia board. You guys don't want to be on top of that subject, do you? We can discuss you too. So they were getting intimidated then, by what I was saying. I said, just with my little camera here, ask our Indigenous young people with such no respect.
And did he end up getting charged for that?
Yeah, he did. You got your legs out there, they're sitting on your legs. The minute you go free, how can he flick his head and hit the person that's in the head part? I said, I said to the police officer, I want to see that on camera because I didn't capture that part. Why? Because it didn't bloody happen. That's why. Because I had the camera right on you guys. I want to see that proof. Well, I said, I didn't see that either. So anyways, they rang me up today to go and to make a statement on his behalf to put my son away. Who does that?
It's just more quiet, and that's just all my family out there.
Yeah.
It's good old the family. That's our little tribe there now. But we need to keep that strong, survive in this world, in this land, in this country, and we'll all be happy. We can all be happy. All of us. There's no need to be putting each other down for no reason. Just because you don't like them, you just need to give it up, mate. It's not worth it.
What did you think of the mob today at the courthouse?
They were just wasting time, right? They just really
Yeah.
didn't care about time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't care about time.
Mm.
They were wasting time.
Yeah.
Your ancestors' paintings on the wall. There's a voice on the wind calling your name. They're asking you to look after the country that now belongs to you. For your children and their children to come. You belong on the open plain. You're a flower that blooms after the rain. You belong to the rugged ranges. You belong to this mighty river. Born of a girl you are. I was born here. My country. I look after it.
What they sing? So yeah, that was Butter, and when he said one arm point, that's the English translation of Adi Alun. Yeah, I think Butter and Rahana and my other narrators kind of made me realize that I suppose I was looking for a lot of new solutions and new things for me to discover, or innovation, or something to address how we tell activist histories and how we do activism outside of linear temporality. And I think they kind of made me realize that the solutions were much more obvious and less active than I imagined. That I simply had to respect time, look backwards, look forwards, and observe kind of this everywhen. And that footage of him singing was just after we got back from the courtroom. And he was also, the footage of him rapping was just after the courtroom. And he's like a poet and a rapper. And he writes a lot of raps about his experiences. And he wrote one just after the courtroom, and then we listened to music for many hours after that. Yeah, so I suppose that leads me to these questions that I mentioned before. The first one is, how have you felt the everywhen?
I can take it in the chat for you, Bronte.
Perfect. Yeah, how have you felt the everywhen? And then how did you feel watching these clips? And then in your own community, or in your own culture, or one that you're interested in, how do you think control or lack of control of temporality plays a role? And yeah, feel free to chime in or just type things in the chat. I know we started a little later than expected, so if anyone, I see people have to head off, that's totally fine. But yeah, if anyone wants to chime in.
Thank you, Bronte. These are really great questions. One quick question I can ask you while folks are starting to ponder these kind of deeper questions is, have you shared the docuseries, this first episode, elsewhere? What has it been like to share it? And people want to know if they can watch the whole thing on their own.
Yes, I've done one screening of this here in New York. That was quite a small screening. I haven't got this like publicly accessible at the moment, but if there's a way, maybe I could just provide my email, and if people wanted to reach out and watch the full version, if you wanted to just email me to do that. I'm currently kind of figuring out where I want to put it and how to kind of, yeah, where I should put it and where I will be putting it. Rahana, I've really wants me to like put it on TV somehow. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. So yeah, but just email me if you want to copy. And yeah, at the screening, actually, Rahana left like a video message for everyone. Probably should have shown you guys that, but yeah, just email me and I can put my email in the chat.
In the chat, Manella says that watching the clip, she felt transported into the story as if she too was a part of the story. Amber says that she felt that everyone driving down a back road in the country. Personally, I feel like I feel that when I'm swimming in a river. And Caleb says, I remember in the hospital, they operated on my hip and told me not to leave my bed without help. I was left unattended for a while. I did have access to things to do. While I did have access to things to do, I simply looked at how the light began to change as the sun went down, simply thinking, simply waiting for nothing.
Wow. Beautiful. Thanks, guys, for your responses.
I do have some responses, but sounds like a weird request, but I'd just like to leave it till last, or yeah, a bit later, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally. Whenever you feel you would like to.
I'm thinking a lot about, I work in the South Bronx and live in the South Bronx, and there's this really violent kind of temporality that's imposed on us through this kind of linear narrative of decline and rebirth that erases all of the beautiful things that were happening during the bad times, or makes them this kind of like very flat redemption narrative, and then makes it seem like anything good that happens is new, and coming from outside, or coming from, again, some kind of like very flat, like pull yourself up, phoenix rising from the ashes is the and so I think about that a lot when I think about your work and how it relates to a non-Indigenous context, but a context that's also sort of violently racialized. Because of course the good days were the days when it was a white area, and the bad days are the days when it was no longer a white area. I'm just falling down on my quotes, but there's air quotes around all of that.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose since I don't see any other clamoring responses, hang on, I'll just turn off my fan. As you'd recall, I'm sure, Bronte, it is still hot in February in Australia. It's currently meant to be like 32 in Canberra today.
Jealous.
Yeah. Oh, no, I am not a big fan of the heat, actually. And my family, my people, we are coastal people, not inland dry heat people. So I'm like, where's my coastal breeze? But like, so for one, I'm really enjoyed your presentation and your work, because I've wanting to move more into oral history and story work, I've actually just recently, just yesterday, left my job at the Australian Dictionary of Biography and I was enjoying biography work, but it was too traditional and focused on conventional time and just convention in general, actually. So this made me think in part, about temporality and, that white focus on history and strict linear time, and particular and in that linear time, particular linear relationships and strict people, and you know what I mean, very colonial concepts, which is not Indigenous relationships and concepts or anything like that. But also more personally, watching these clips and things like that for me were actually in some ways a bit, I suppose, almost trauma triggering, right? And just bringing to mind all some personal family trauma and all the traumatizing things from colonialism, about my own brother being arrested, and having to go to court twice, and my own family disconnections and issues with connecting, and that importance, and then how we lose family connections and temporality, and how we lose our own everywhen because of colonization and the impact of colonization, and how we how that cultural genocide happens, and how it is still happening because of these impacts, and all of that. But it was just really great and wonderful to see how their family was still thriving, and I loved Butter, and how he just seeing him enjoy his music so much, which I personally do as well, and just see him connecting with that, and his lines about still being free and more free than they will ever be was just so wonderful, so yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kira. Is it Kira? Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, I think in every one of the stories that I was recording, Shane and Rahana and Jaja, some other people that I spoke to that I haven't mentioned, everyone had a lot of overlaps, and over incarceration of Indigenous Australians is obviously such a huge thing that I'm not sure if the American audience or international audience is super aware of, but Indigenous Australians are, I think, the most incarcerated people in the world, and it's really I don't know anyone who's Indigenous who hasn't been affected by this, again, similar to the stolen generation. So thank you for sharing that. And I think Butter is just such a great example of a lot of the Indigenous men and Indigenous women who end up stuck in these systems that refuse to understand them, and I think what you said about music and how we all kind of heal with music is really resonant for me too. And I think after any conversation that was a bit traumatic, we'd all just listen to music or play music, or even tell the stories through music. And I think that's so, across the world and across communities everywhere, of course, that's a massive thing. And I think that's what I appreciate that you picked up on that, because I tried to like portray these conversations that are kind of like background conversations, or, you know, maybe not someone being like, this happened in this year and this was related to this thing, but more so just like what life really feels like and what experiences of pain and pleasure feel like at the same time. So I really appreciate you picking up on both of those things in your response.
Yes,
that's like,
yeah,
that's trying to get to.
Yeah,
so thank you.
I actually think that's something so true, because just incidentally, that's like I was talking to my husband about recently, about just ways of communication, and it's such an unnatural way to have a conversation, to sit down and be like, these are the things that happened to me and this is my issues, right? Because sometimes he's like, just but you know, just ways of talking, speaking of ways of talking, you know, because he's like, no, when I come home, he's like, wants to ask me how my day was, how, you know, what did you do today? I'm like, I don't want to walk in the door and answer that question. You know, to me, it's more natural to like sit down, you know, be hanging out for, you know, the evening or for an hour or two, and then we'll be doing things, whatever. And then when you feel like it, then you say a bit about what you're doing, a bit about things that happened. You know what I mean? Totally. Like that's how things come up, right? And I think that, like you said, if that's what you've shown in your documentary, then yeah, that is a reflection of natural ways of how conversations happen. I think about how conversations I've had with my mother and my aunties and stuff like that. That's how conversations happen. That's how you learn and how you talk and live. Yeah. So totally. I think that's really wonderful that you tried to capture that.
Thank you. Thanks.
We have time for maybe one or two other questions or comments. Folks who are sharing things in the chat, if you want to speak out loud, you're very welcome to, or let me know if you want me to read your comments out loud. It's really neat to see what a global audience this is and how these stories and experiences are resonating with folks in so many different ways.
Yeah, I just saw, Paulette, your comment, that it reminded you of the ways your great-grandmother and great-aunts related to time, from African Americans on the eastern shore of Maryland. So that's really special that that's like a cross-continental resonance.
Google makes a connection to Canada. I know you raised the question at the start of, you know, what does it mean to talk about recording Indigenous oral histories as a practice that spans such a broad range of different kinds of cultural contexts. So we've got a lot of experience with that in this room tonight.
Does anyone have a question that they want to ask rather than answering my questions? Otherwise.
Hey,
Anella.
Well, for the effort to try and answer at least your last question, and I was just trying to think more about it, and even thinking like, well, what would I consider my own culture? So to not even try to make anything overly general, but I was thinking of, say, an African culture. It seems, from my experience, sometimes the lack of control of time almost prevents us from remembering. Yeah, so that was really it. And that's something I've just now started to ruminate around.
Yeah, I think, I guess in some ways that like what I was talking about earlier as well, with is deliberate ways of making people forget and deliberate ways of tying certain things to the past. And yeah, and I think tying certain things to the future is like the settler claim on the future is just as strong as their insistence that the Indigenous claim is only relative or acceptable in the past. So yeah, I think temporality has a lot, I think, yeah, changing how we think about time has a lot to offer to decolonizing oral history. And just, yeah, I don't know. I see Melissa Ann has a question. Did you want to?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank
I'm
you.
also I'm in Jojage, Montreal, and the residential school system is a thing that is very much part of our reality. And I was wondering, listening to your talk and your clips, if you felt comfortable talking a little bit about how your own experience was interviewing these people, talking about time and the everyone and all of this in the way you were, and then going and writing a thesis in an institution that is perhaps a lot more culturally settler oriented. And I was just wondering if you felt comfortable talking about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this was something I talked a lot to Amy about, of even just like how I like oriented my story within oral history as like a discipline that's also like layered with colonial expectations and things like that. I think honestly, yeah, I found that just letting my narrators dictate what I would kind of focus on, both in the documentary itself and then in my like reflective thesis about it, was a way that I kind of, yeah, navigated that whole conundrum. I think, yeah, I think, I mean, the Amy's like, particularly in, I feel like this program, like the fluidity of what I was able to produce meant that I didn't feel super bound by any kind of expectation, which was really helpful, because then I felt like I could kind of just like go wherever with it. So that really helped. But I did always, yeah, I always felt weird being like analyzing these experiences that I'd had. And I kind of tried to focus in my thesis on just specific quotes of things that people had said that resonated with this reimagined temporality, rather than analyzing. I don't know, I feel like a lot of like anthropological stuff kind of can sometimes analyze people as if it's like they're these like interesting people that have all these behaviors. So I was kind of just trying to really only focus on quotes that people told me. And I discussed, I mean, throughout the thesis, I discussed with my narrators like what they thought was important, and time just kept coming up. But yeah, I think it was like a weird thing. And also just, I think generally being an Indigenous academic is a weird thing, because it's like, yeah, you're like, you feel the weight of trying to present something that in some way speaks for Indigenous people, not because I think that it should, but because I think that's often the expectation when an Indigenous person does anything, is that they're speaking for all Indigenous people and representing an Indigenous way of being. So I think I tried to keep it specific to the narrators and to the places they were from and the people that were around them and the animals that were around them and the things that we did, to try and like counteract my own mental battle of like, I'm an Indigenous researcher. And the Letty Leanne talks a lot about this, of like the weirdness of like being an Indigenous oral historian and asking someone about their traumatic experiences that you might have also shared. And like the weird power imbalance of like interviewer and interviewee. So that I kind of navigated that by just having like conversations, and a lot of the interview with Rohanna is in a car. Like almost all of the audio of her is us driving to Adialoon, because that just felt the most natural. And like Kira was saying, yeah, I think the best conversations happen when the focus isn't conversation, in a sense.
Sorry. You want to
yeah, I noticed, the question was about what it was like to interview these people and then make a thesis. And I feel like from my perspective, it didn't seem like you were really thinking of it as interviewing necessarily, but more as conversation and hanging out, which I think is such an important move for our field. And there's a lot of, I'll make sure to we'll send you the chat afterwards, Bronte, so you can see all the love and appreciation for what you've shared that's coming through there. We'll send out, for everyone who's asking, we'll send out a recording of the talk afterwards. And I'll say again that Bronte's written thesis is available online. It's like the whole, including the cover page and everything, it's like 20 pages long, and somehow encapsulates in beautiful writing a lot of what she shared tonight. So if you want to keep thinking about this, if you want to check out the bibliography, if you want to assign this work or read it with other people, I think that's a great place to get started while Bronte's thinking about how to share the media components. So thank you all so much again for being here. Thank you, Bronte, for sharing this really important work.
Thank you.
Yeah, good night.
Thank you all for being here. And thanks, Amy.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.